As we've been reporting, Milwaukee is hosting the Republican National Convention. It's just about 90 minutes away from where the party was born 170 years ago. CBS News Sunday Morning correspondent Mo Rocca takes a look at the history of the GOP.
What happens at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee this week will help determine whether Donald Trump, whose vision of America differs sharply from that of President Joe Biden, will return to the White House. But it was a much smaller meeting in a much smaller town about 90 miles away that proved every bit as consequential.
These were people who wanted to form a new party.
On March 20th, 1854, around 50 concerned citizens gathered inside Ripon, Wisconsin's Little White Schoolhouse, widely believed to be the birthplace of the Republican Party. Russell Blake is a history professor emeritus at nearby Ripon College. Were these farmers? Were they merchants?
There were a combination of merchants, farmers, lawyers. It was a town that was only 4 or 5 years old. People had only recently moved here.
And all of them were alarmed by the prospect of slavery spreading westward. What did these earliest Republicans believe?
They believed that the nation had been founded on the supposition that slavery would eventually disappear. They really did believe in what they called a free society.
But earlier that same year, Congress had introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act, allowing settlers in those territories to decide whether slaveholding would be permitted. The earlier Missouri Compromise had prohibited slavery in those areas. For anti-slavery Americans, like the ones meeting in Ripon, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was a profound betrayal.
They were just people who were outraged by this because the old parties had failed, and there needed to be some new force in American politics.
Richard Brookhiser is a historian and senior editor at the National Review. This March 1854 Wisconsin newspaper item denounced the bill as a nefarious scheme. Is that the kind of earthquake that's required to start a new party?
Well, yeah, to start a new major party.
Ripon wasn't the only place where citizens were mobilizing. Ordinary Americans who felt politically homeless were meeting throughout the North. How quickly did this movement grow?
Well, it grew so quickly that in 1856, the Republicans fielded a presidential candidate, John Fremont, who came very close to winning.
You compare it to other third parties, Ross Perot or George Wallace or Libertarians, no one has had a debut like that.
Just 4 years later, its second candidate for president, Abraham Lincoln, went all the way. For nearly 70 years after the Civil War, the GOP dominated the White House. Only 2 Democrats won election during that span. That run came to a crashing halt in the early 1930s.
The Great Depression practically eliminates it for a while. I mean, Hoover is president when the bottom falls out of the stock market, and Roosevelt wins in a landslide in 1932. And after World War II, there is a competitive two-party system once again.
Who makes up the Republican Party today?
Donald Trump and those who admire him. That's the short answer.
Well, that sounds like a party shaped by a single person.
It is.
If those earliest Republicans looked at the GOP today, would they recognize themselves in any way?
Probably not. I think they would be surprised at the corporatization of America in general, whether that's represented by Republicans or Democrats. Theirs was a world in which everything was on a small scale. The idea of large corporations, like the idea of large slave plantations, probably would have made them nervous.
Where do you think we'll be party-wise in 10 years?
I don't think either party will implode. I think they've been around too long. There's too much infrastructure, so to speak. When Trump retires or steps down, There will be plenty of Republicans who are office holders who will be looking after number one.